Hi, today we're diving into Pharo, a super cool open source language and IDE which is said to be immersive. In this series, we'll set up Pharo, explore its environment, write a simple class, and learn some fun stuff together along the way. If you wish for a more detailed course on Pharo, I'll provide some useful links in the description box below. Since this is a keyboard focused channel, I'll focus the camera on the keyboard all along. So without further ado, let's dive into Pharo. So first off, head to pharo.org and download the latest version for your system, be it Windows, Mac or Linux. It's free and super easy to use. Once you got it, you can just simply follow the steps, go next, and then you can launch the Pharo launcher. Since I have already installed Pharo in my system, I'm just gonna launch Pharo Launcher. And Pharo Launcher is what creates images of Pharo. Think of it as your personal instance of Pharo for different purposes. You can twist it, even break it, and then create a new one. So since it's your first time playing with Pharo, probably, you're going to want to create a new image and you're going to choose the version. If you're not sure, you can just use the stable version, the 12, and you can name your image. Think of it like a live memory dump of what you're doing. So we're going to name this YouTube tutorial, for example, and we're going to create that image and it's going to download the zip archive for that particular version. So here we're just going to wait for it to download and then we'll be back. Alright, now that the download is over, let's explore Pharo. You're greeted with this welcome message which allows you to choose dark or light. We're gonna go with light. We can toggle full screen mode. One interesting thing that you can do here is use ProfSteff. ProfSteff, you can learn some keyboard shortcuts to navigate through Pharo quickly. We're not going to do that, but I strongly advise if you're going to learn on your own to get a grasp on how Pharo works, you can just click here and use ProfSteff. And then you're just going to walk through the tutorial, do it, how to execute this thing, how to go to the next command, how to do this, how to do that, but we're just gonna skip for now. Here is another important point. Pharo has an excellent MOOC that you can follow to learn Pharo step by step instead of the direct hands-on guide that I'm going to provide here. And you have also books which can help you learn it. You can check these out for yourself. So now what we're going to do is going to close it. So now that we have closed that window, here you have the world. Kind of like old school, isn't it? So here you can click anywhere and just go browse your system. You can use Git directly, you can use Playground to write some code, etc. So here I'm going to open the Playground, which is going to be OP, okay? And we can do some basic instructions like 3 plus 4, going to select it, and with Command P, I can print out the result, or just simply execute it by saying do it, okay? And they have a really great inspector as well, just to show you the values of the variables. We're not going to get into that for the moment. Rather, in this video, we're going to write the most basic class ever, the counter class, which is going to count from a certain number. We can increment it, decrement it, and use some test-driven development. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you see what is written on the video. So I'm going to increase the font size first. So we're going to go Pharo, settings, and we're going to search for font, right? And then font size, let me see. Oh boy. I think display scale factor increased to 1.5 is more than enough for this video, even though it looks super old, not gonna lie. So we're gonna close this. So one of the things you're going to use a lot when starting with Pharo is the system browser, which I like to open with Command OB. And then here you have all the source code for Pharo. You can modify it, you can see it. That's one of the things I like with Pharo. You can see what's going on, you can touch it, you can modify it, you can interact with them. That's why they call it an immersive experience. You can like jump into the pool and play with the fishes, interact with them instead of just looking. And it's okay if you break it actually, because you can just create another image and you can just use Git to revert your changes. So for this coding part, we're going to create a counter class, which has a single attribute, count. It's going to be initialized to 0 by default. We can call the increment method to increase it by 1, or the decrement method to decrease it by 1. We're going to create some getter and setters, just like plain OOP. So we're going to first create the package right here. We're going to say new package, and it's going to be a counter app, which is going to be the name of the package. And inside of it, we're going to create our very first class. We can say new class here, or we can write the code down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write it by hand. So it's called counter class, right? And it inherits the object superclass, which is the superclass of every class in Pharo and in Java as well, for example. Slots is going to be the attributes. I want a unique string that says count because I don't want multiple attributes to have the same name. Shared variables, I don't need it, I'm going to delete it, and it's going to be in the package counter app. And here we can just say command S to save, and we have our class. By respecting TDD, we should first create our test before writing our code. And therefore, I should be able to write tests without any implementation in my class whatsoever. So I'm going to write some tests as well, so that you can see what is to be expected from this exercise. So what I'm expecting are the following. If I ever create an object counter without specifying the count value, should be initialized to 0 by default. That's the first one. The second one is that once I increment the count, it should increment. Once I decrement, it should decrement. Pretty straightforward, right? But for teaching purposes, we can do the basic OOP stuff here. We can create the constructor, we can generate accessors if you want to. So that's what I'm going to do here for the simplicity of it. So first and foremost, we're going to write the initialize method, okay? It's the constructor. So during the initialization of the object, we want count to be comma equal to 0, and we conclude the statement with a period, just like in real life. Command S to save, and you have your initialize method. Now, same thing with getter and setters. We're going to create the getter for count, which is going to be count, and count returns, this is the symbol for return in Pharo, it's going to return count. Pretty basic. As for the setter, you're just going to say count with an argument, which is going to be integer. So this is going to set count to that integer. Of course, you can put conditions and checks right before assigning that value, but we're just going to keep it simple here. Save, and then you have your getter, setter, and your constructor. Now, we want to create the test now, okay? So we're going to click here and see that everything works. We're going to create new test class, which is a set of tests, and we can say, for example, counter tests. Now that you have your set of tests, you can simply write tests or methods inside of this. So we're going to write our very first test. For example, test initialize is going to be our first test. So what we're going to do is going to create a counter, and its count should be 0 at the very beginning by default, right? So we're going to create a temporary variable, vertical bar, C, vertical bar, and then C, comma, equal to a new instance of counter. So we're going to say, hey, counter, create me a new object instantiation. And then that's it. So we send a message to that class, that object, that you're going to create a new object out of that class. Pretty straightforward. And then what we want to do is we want to assert that C object that we created, if we summon the count message or the count method, if you want to say so, it should be equals to 0, right? And by convention, since the name of my test is test initialize, it recognizes that it tests this method, okay? What we can do is we can run the test right from here, so it works. We can write tests as well for the getter and the setter if you want to. Now we can go on to test other methods other than the usual constructor, getter, setter methods. We're going to test the increment and decrement methods. We have not created them yet, so we're going to write the test first, because that's what good TDD implies. So we're going to do the test first. For example, I'm going to keep it very simple. Test increment, right? And what we want to do is that we want to create a variable and then assign it to be an instance of counter. Okay, and then what we want to do is that we want to invoke the increment message or the increment method. Then we want to assert that count equals to 1, which is pretty basic, to be honest. And now we have the test increment. We can also write the decrement method, which should work. Decrement, and then you have your new counter. And one thing that I like about Pharo is that it's pretty elegant in its syntax, really. So you have this object. One thing that I can do is I can keep sending messages to the resulting object. So for example, I can say on that object, on that instance of counter, just say that count is now equal to 7, right? So instead of incrementing, I want to test if it works if I decrement the count, right? So I assert that the count is now going to be 6. So I have the test for decrement and increment all together before I even write the code. So increment is this and decrement is this. Of course, one of the things that we want to do here is that we want to break things. We want to run the test. And of course, the debugger of Pharo is going to say, oh, I do not know what increment is. But it gives us the option to create it right into the debugger, right? So I say increment, I want to write it inside of the counter class. Yes. And here, increment, I'm just going to code it right into the debugger here. I'm going to say that count, column equal, count plus 1, period. There you go. And then I can proceed. It works. And then we're going to break some other stuff and says that decrement does not exist. I'm going to create it inside of the counter class. Boom. We have the method that should be implemented, and decrement should be like count is assigned to count minus 1, period, and then finally proceed. And now we have all of our tests that works. To summarize, this is the system browser. You can browse through your packages. This is what's inside of your packages. These are called protocols, which is a group of methods to keep things organized. And then inside of each protocol, you have your methods. You have, for example, the getter, where we saw the syntax of return right here. You have the setter, which we saw the assignment symbol for Pharo right here. You have the decrement method and the increment method, and you have the constructor. To prove that they work efficiently, we wrote test beforehand, or at least for the most part. So we have test decrement, which creates a variable, sets it to 7 for the count, and then decrement it to 6. We have the test increment, which instantiates an object and then increases it to 1. We have test initialize, which sets the default count for a new object to 0 when it's not specified. So that's it for this quick overview of Pharo. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this is just an introduction. We're going to see in the next videos how does that work. We're going to do some hands-on exercises to keep practicing our skills in Pharo and object-oriented programming. So in my opinion, Pharo is very fun and easy to learn, but the one thing that I really dislike is the UI. But normally the devs are going to update that very soon. So I hope you enjoyed the little video. It's not very typical of my channel, but I'm going to write more about programming instead of just typing nonsense all day with my typing tests. See you guys around.